so when a company is looking to, I guess, suggest or show that it has an alternative, better approach to patient care, what sort of issues do you, encourage management teams to be thinking about? How can they ensure that they're going to win sort of share of voice in that crowded market, both amongst physicians and also patients?
Good question, Mike. I guess when we're working with companies that have assets that aren't necessarily differentiated, are operating in crowded markets, and have to cut through the clutter, so to speak, then, as I mentioned in the previous use case, we do need to come to the table with a range of different alternatives, which are, to the point I mentioned before, clinically viable, developmentally feasible, and commercially compelling. And in so doing, there are a few foundational principles as far as the analysis is concerned. And aside of what I mentioned, one important fundamental principle is, when we've gotten to a point where we don't believe any of the options or any of the alternatives make sense. In our past experience, we've not shied away from letting the client know that, look, we've reached a dead end. There is no value in this particular program. Then that in itself triggers interesting discussions as to, okay, it may not be valuable for us, but could it be valuable for another company or another asset owner, another developer? And that could be for a range of different reasons. It could be because they have deeper pockets and are willing to absorb the risk of development, which our client may not be. It could be that they already have an asset in the indication, and for them, therefore, the value bringing in this additional asset as a follow-on is something that they can consider, as opposed to a new entrant, which has a higher barrier to entry in that particular indication. So it's not just looking at options in-house, it's also looking at options externally. And that's a process that we actively encourage clients to consider, especially if they're open to potential licensing out or potential partnership. Many times in the environment that we work in, biotechs have, and to your point, Mike, earlier, biotechs are going through the cycle of advancing their own assets through in-house commercialization, as opposed to, say, 5 or 10 years ago, where out-licensing was the model. But it's important for biotechs to still maintain the option of the out-license or the partner on the table. And in many cases, when you do the valuation of the asset, assuming a partner's capabilities or a partner's infrastructure, then you might actually realize that it makes more sense and it creates more value to consider the out-license, consider the sale. And that's something that we, to the point I mentioned earlier, in terms of areas we operate in, we do support companies with those out-licensing evaluations to ensure that we've evaluated all options on the table and we create value for the client.
So in the examples you've shared, what does engagement between your team and the sort of the client actually look like? I mean, how long is the sort of the process, and are these just discrete one-off arrangements? Yeah, how does it work?
Sure. Well, pre-COVID, we would engage with clients fairly collaboratively, fairly, I would say, intensively, in that most oftentimes projects start off with an intensive kickoff and mobilization phase, where we spend a fair bit of time in working sessions with the clients, understanding their current asset, the profile, the TPP, all the work that's been done so far in terms of clinical development, shape the research plan or the business questions together, and then advance forward into a research and analytical phase. That involves building hypotheses, that involves structuring the research and the analysis, whether it's primary, whether it's analog analysis, whether it's doing literature search for epidemiology or competition, doing all the analysis that leads us into the eventual analysis for the valuation or for the financial modeling or for the revenue forecasting. And then, of course, once we've done that, we come back to the client, present results. And what we try and do more often than not is not just leave them with the outputs or outcomes of the analysis, but try and give them a tangible sense of, so what? What does this mean for you from a strategy perspective? Should you invest or not? Should you expand geographically or not? Should you partner or keep in-house? And that kind of decision orientation, which is the culmination of the project, is what drives value for the client in terms of engaging with us. Typically, these kind of engagements for emerging biopharma companies or biotech companies would last between 6 to 10 or 12 weeks, depending on how complex the problem is. As I said, we try and engage very collaboratively. Oftentimes, the best results are ones where there's iterative refinement of the hypotheses, there's active contribution to the research instruments, there's significant pressure testing of the financial model, the financial evaluation, and the recommendations. And as I mentioned before, more often than not, clients appreciate the analytical rigor, they appreciate the guidance and the direction that we provide, the recommendations we make. And therefore, the way we structure our engagements, we always leave the door open for follow-on work. And clients oftentimes come back to us with either the next phase of the same question or come back to us asking for a similar analysis on a different asset or a different indication. And that's how we build the relationship. That's how we build trust.
Right. So, as a sort of final question, and this is it's almost like the bottom line question. Biotech management, they're constantly looking at sort of return on investment. Sort of very much it's around sort of preserving the sort of the capital resources that they have. So I can imagine that many in the audience are going to sort of saying, while they're agreeing that sort of, the insights that you and your team can provide are going to be useful, they're probably sort of thinking, but how much does this cost, and could we afford it?
Sure. So I guess the way that we structure our engagements is we typically structure them or structure our fees based on the time we spend, the effort we expend, and the expertise that we bring to the table. And whilst sometimes the price tag can be one that biotechs, especially pre-revenue biotechs, find somewhat prohibitive, the truth is we adopt a flexible modular orientation. So we've oftentimes worked with clients where we can break down the problem statement into its constituent parts. And then instead of going for a single project, you can actually split that up into multiple projects and kind of almost in a stage-gated process, unpeel the onion, right, so to speak. And clients appreciate that. And that's part of our flexible boutique orientation. That being said, there have been clients that have given urgency, given immediacy to address the strategic question. They have gone with us, and at the end, in my experience, most clients have appreciated the value that we brought to the table, and they've recognized that it's money well spent. And that's a function of, again, strategic recommendation, because we can demonstrate the value for the biotech in concrete financial terms. And when they communicate that back to their investors, case in point, we actually do have a biotech that's come back to us, and they may be considering going public this year. And they've actually come back to us asking for guidance on their strategy, um, which impacts their going public. And that's on the back of work that we did with them before. So whilst there was, as you can imagine, a bit of negotiation that happened the first time around, the second time they want to work with us because they saw the value.